Good afternoon, everyone. How's everyone doing? After lunch, kind of sleepy? Well, you guys have no excuse because I just got off the plane from New York at 9 a.m. this morning and came straight here. So if I start falling asleep on stage, then someone throw something at me, okay? So anyways, I'm Cassie Shum. I've been working for ThoughtWorks for about 8 years now. I'm from the New York office, but we actually, I don't know, has anyone heard of ThoughtWorks? Okay, cool. So we're probably more famous because of Mr. Martin Fowler and Neil Ford, and we have Sam Newman, who is an ex-ThoughtWorker who made the book Building Microservices, so a lot of that came from that. But essentially, what we do is we're an IT consultancy, so a lot of this deck is around a lot of our experiences with consulting with other companies and enterprise systems, and they all come to us and say, we want microservices, and we're like, oh my gosh, calm down, let's talk about that for a second. So let's go ahead and get started. So I like magic, and I like silver bullets, right? I want something to cure everything, and so one of the things that came about, I guess, the last 4 years is, oh, microservices, it's going to save everything. And as a consultant from ThoughtWorks, I'm sitting here like, wait, is it going to save everything? I don't know, because with the book coming out and everything, it was really great. But the reality of the situation is this is actually something that I tend to go to in different companies. So we kind of talked about big ball of mud. This is an actual big ball of mud. So whose enterprise looks like this? Oh, come on. They do. This is your big monolith right here. And so interestingly enough, if you look a little bit closer, and I can actually send this deck out, this is a real client and the real complexity and tight coupling of their monolithic application. We had to go in there a few years ago and say, oh, and it's a financial institution, a very big one, and they came to us and said, okay, let's have microservices. And we went, hold on one second, okay? So yes, let's start with that. But thinking about the big monolith, this is my analogy for a big monolith. This is big truck. Sorry, I'm American. We have these big trucks, and it goes really slow, and everything's tightly coupled together. And so everybody is always talking about microservices as, yes, F1, I can relate, right? So having these small, independent things going at their own pace, it just seems like a much, much better idea. All right? So okay, ta-da, microservices. That's why we're here today, to talk about it and to be excited about how microservices is the best thing and everybody should use it and everybody should just jump right to it. No. Really, I want to talk about the pros and cons, and I think cons is actually kind of a negative word for it. It's more of, let's think about these things before you jump right into it. So I'm going to go through a series of pros and cons of microservices, and so the blue font is going to be our pros, and then our red scary font is going to be our cons. So we'll sort of go through that. So the first pro that everybody gets excited about with microservices is, oh my gosh, it's the right tool for the job. All right? So if you're looking at decentralized governance and you look at this big monolithic application here and it all feeds into one database, with microservices we can actually split everything up and pick the right database for what you need, pick the right language that makes sense for your particular service itself. It seemed really great, and it is really great because now I don't actually have to stick with my same old Java SQL stack. Nothing against Java or SQL. I've been doing it for a long time. But there are new technologies out there. There are new things that actually make services better, faster, more performant, and those types of things. So why not go to an architecture that leads to more flexibility of using those different types of tools? So we have, all of these are just some examples of things that we can use in our microservices architecture. However, I would like to warn everyone not to go crazy over this, because what we have seen in the industry is people going to these microservices architecture, they say, oh my gosh, I'm going to use Clojure because it's my favorite. Yeah, right? It's my favorite right now, and I love Clojure, and I've been doing all my koans, and I'm excited about it. But from an enterprise point of view, is that the actual right decision, or are you just in love with a particular language at the moment? So those are the kind of things that we can get really, really excited about microservices and pick all the tools that we want and all the tech that we want and all of these things. But what I would say is like pull back and say, what is actually right for your business? What is actually going to work for your microservices architecture? But it is a pretty cool thing that we can be a bit more flexible about it. All right, but with that comes a con, which is cognitive complexity, okay? I think I'm actually kind of a smart person, but with all these microservices coming around and all the different languages and databases and everything that I have to know, it's really tough. Just think about as a developer in a microservices architecture world. Back in the day, when I was doing my Java SQL, I had my IDE app, I had IntelliJ app, and I'm just writing my code, and it's in this monolith. I can pull the repo, and it's great. Now in this microservices architecture, I as a developer have to understand how I'm going to talk to this service that's actually in Ruby, and this one that's in Java still, and then maybe some Clojure one that someone brought in because they liked it. And all of a sudden, how am I going to know all of that in order to just create one feature, right? So this is actually something that we have to really think about, and we need to pull back when we're actually saying, let's pick all the tools and all the databases, because this is going to be the problem that you'll have is that cognitive complexity, okay? Ooh, monitoring and testing. Who actually, like in the beginning, I remember like monitoring always came as an afterthought for some enterprises. There's like, oh yeah, we should probably add logging to those types of things. When you're talking about microservices architecture now, this should be a first-class citizen along with testing and along with everything else with microservices. But when enterprises don't think about this, then we're going to come into some trouble here. So with monitoring, let's think about you're in production already, and you're here with your microservices architecture. You have 20 microservices out there, and then a bug occurs, a big production bug. And I don't really have that great monitoring or logging or whatever. How are you going to find where that bug is? Because now you have many, many different services where it actually could be. And it was a lot easier in our monolithic days to say, okay, let's debug in my IDE and this and that. But now I have all of these different things now. I don't know where that bug is. And so that can actually be a really, really big issue if you don't have logging and monitoring done correctly in your microservices architecture. So one really, really good example of logging is thinking about things like correlation IDs. Who's used correlation IDs in their microservices? Thank God, right? Because without the correlation IDs, how am I going to know what call called what and this and that, and where everything ended up to be? So this is actually something that we really, really need to think about in terms of monitoring and logging. But a pro is scaling, right? We heard about scaling a lot, which is kind of one of the big reasons why we're thinking about microservices architecture, right? This is why businesses are saying, yeah, let's do this because we want to scale certain things. But do you want to scale everything or do you want to scale certain things? And I think this is actually something that's interesting because a lot of people are like, yes, we want to scale all the things. And really, I want to bring people back to thinking about the business, all right? Thinking about what are you actually trying to scale. So for example, a couple years ago, again, I work with a lot of financial institutions. I should probably work on that. But another financial institution said, look, we need to scale our entire system. And so let's go ahead and go to event-driven architecture and microservices. And we were like, whoa, calm down. Let's talk about it from a business point of view. And in the end, we actually drove down and realized that they really needed to scale their payment systems because they weren't able to take the load of how people are paying and those transactions and the money going through. And so what we talked about with them is, okay, why don't we just pull out the payment system and keep everything else in the monolith because you don't need to scale that just yet. And that's actually precisely what we did. We didn't say go every microservice in the world. Let's just pull the one out that actually makes sense for your business at this moment in time and actually gradually go to that architecture. So that's something to consider when you're really thinking about scaling. What is it that you actually want to scale? Not the whole thing, but the things that are most important to your business. So in the end, we pulled out the payment system. I think what we kept in the monolith was like, customer information. Like how often does an address change, right? And And how often does like the I don't know, like the interest rate change? I mean, it depends on like the business itself. So thinking about that scalability factor is really, really important. I heard earlier, I think it was Mark who was saying, think about designing your system for failure. So Nygaard here says, if you fail to design for production, your life will be filled with excitement. Yeah, that's not the excitement you want. The excitement is going to be up all night long trying to figure out, oh my gosh, this thing went down, it failed, but we don't know why. So really what we need to do in this whole new architecture is really design for if something does fail, what's going to happen to your system? What happens to your infrastructure, right? And so that is one thing that you need to have the maturity to really thinking about the failure system. So again, quoting around the chaos monkey and all of those things, really, really testing your systems to make sure that they're not, that they can fail, but they can fail safely, that your business is not going to go down in flames. Too much excitement. So this is a big one. This is actually why microservices became so attractive, right? Because we'd like to deploy things individually, all right? So I remember the time when I think this was maybe 6 years ago, we were waiting for a big production deploy of our big monolith of the client that we were working with. And I actually sat up all weekend waiting for this deployment to happen because it was scary. We made so many changes. It was like months and months and months worth of changes. And then going into it and actually trying to go to production, it was mortifying. Like I felt like I was gonna have a heart attack at any moment. Someone said, okay, let's push the production button, like let's go. And I'm like, do we wanna go? I don't know, because it's really, really scary. So one good thing about microservices is the components are now smaller and we can deploy them more individually now. And so I'm not as nervous to actually push out like a small service because not the entire system's gonna go down. Maybe just that one if it doesn't go well, but at least I can pull that one back. It's much, much harder to do that in a monolithic world. The other thing too is, with microservices, being able to deploy features quickly is actually the big point of this. So one thing that ThoughtWorks and Agile and continuous delivery and Martin, we all talk about is the customer, okay? We want to get these features out in front of the customer as quickly as possible. With a big monolithic system, we've found that that's actually really, really hard, and all these features start building up, and it takes a long time to get to production. But now, with a microservices architecture, I can actually deploy features a lot more quicker, right? And so in that sense, I feel a bit safer, and I can get that feedback a lot faster from the customer as well. And that actually grows my business. That will actually, we have the customer in mind in that sense. The other thing around monitoring, around deploying these things individually is now we actually get to know when some of the services are not being used anymore. If we have good monitoring set in place for our individually deployable services, we can actually see, oh my gosh, we haven't been using this service for a long time, let's kill it. Let's get rid of things. I really love that quote. I think someone said, don't be married to your code. Be able to get rid of it because you want a simple, fast system. You don't want to carry all of this burden around, not understanding what each one does. So monitoring each deployable unit is going to be really, really important for that. But when you actually have to deploy all of these different services, this is going to be the big, scary thing, and it's the configuration part of it. So one of the interesting things, I actually, ever since the microservices boom happened, we are now going into clients where they've tried to do microservices on their own, and then they call us and say, help, we did something wrong because this is not working. One of the major things I see when I go into this is they don't even have pipelines. They're like, oh yeah, we tried to put our pipelines together, but it didn't really work, so we just split up our services into microservices. And I'm like, no, don't do that, because the configuration piece, that's actually the most important. This is how you want to standardize your deployment processes. And so our advice is get these pipelines and deployment processes in gear with your monolithic applications before you even try to split them out. Because if you don't have this in place, how are you able to deploy these things as quickly as possible if you can't figure this out, right? And so the other thing that I see as well is that, okay, maybe some of the services had some pipelines and some deployed in other ways, and then some of these services are still being deployed manually. So having different deployment strategies for all the different services is, again, a bad thing, because now I'm confused. I don't know which service, how to deploy what, and where and when, right? So one of the biggest things that Sam Newman says in his Building Microservices book is standardize. Standardize on integration, standardize on your deployment systems. Make sure that those are standardized across the environment, or it's not going to work. You're just creating too much complexity for your organization. But again, another pro is the replaceable aspect of this. And again, I know we've talked about this a lot, but being able to replace an entire monolith is really hard. You can't. I mean, when everyone says, oh, let's do a rewrite of our application, everyone kind of backs away. It's like, no, 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 no. But if you have a microservices architecture, you can actually be able to replace things more quickly when they're smaller pieces. I mean, that's just easy, you know, it's easier to replace it. One of the major things that I've learned as well is being able to really think about, how do I build my system so it can be replaced in the future? We need to really think about that mentality, because technology is changing very quickly. Feature development is changing. Like, customers are needing different things. So you're going to have to be able to replace certain services when need be. We need to stay agile in this environment. So microservices here makes this really easy for us to be able to replace things left and right, you know, when we can and when we need to. Again, if we do this from the big monolithic system, the whole thing is going to go down, and it's very scary. So being able to replace services is really important. But, okay, going back to the con, integration, right? So essentially, you're taking all of the different, you know, coupling that you have in your monolith, and you're just replacing it with just integration between all of these different services. Okay, so this is actually very interesting, because when you actually do this, you really, really need to think about what you're integrating, how you're pulling out the services. One thing that we've seen in a lot of different places is, oh, we'll just pull this service out because I think that makes sense. But they don't really think about the actual integration between all of the services. They don't think about consumer-driven contracts to actually test to make sure, oh, what if one of my systems goes down? Is that okay? Would that actually break all of my other systems? So thinking about those integration pieces are actually really, really important, and actually more important than actually pulling them out. That's why I said, back to that financial institution that we're talking about, we only pulled out the payments system because that's what needed to scale, that's what they wanted to deploy separately, and they wanted to minimize the amount of integration between everything, because they were not ready for the entire environment to be highly integrated in this distributed system. So yeah, I really like this quote. It's like, microservices equals distributed objects for hipsters. What could possibly go wrong? I mean, we're really just, you know, replacing this monolithic system with just a distributed world, which comes with a whole ton of problems. So again, like going back to the fallacies of distributed computing, that's a thing. Definitely Google that. Definitely Google that, because you're actually increasing the complexity of putting everything into the distributed world with microservices. So if you're not getting all the benefits of microservices, then why make your life harder? Why are we doing this? So you have to think about, you know, weighing those pros and cons out. But the final thing, and yeah, yay! Sorry, it came late. I heard this Conway's law was mentioned, but I'm gonna put it in there anyways. This is actually the final and big thing I actually want to talk about around microservices and why this is important. I mean, Conway's law, I'm not going to explain it again because it was this morning. But essentially, you know, when you're thinking about Conway's law and microservices, what we really want to think about is inverse Conway maneuver, okay? So did we talk about that this morning? No? No? Okay, cool, something new. So inverse Conway maneuver is actually thinking about building your teams that look like the architecture that you want to follow. Okay, so being able to look at these cross-functional teams, before, if it was this big monolith and it was let's see, I did have a picture before, but normally in big monolithic worlds, you have, like, say, for example, a 3-tiered system. You have, like, your UI people, and they're in one team. You have your services people, they're in another team. Your database people are in the basement somewhere because we don't like talking to them. And those are all the separate teams, right? And so what we want to do is actually really think about the cross-functional teams of those and actually combine those people together into these teams that are actually more feature-focused. Like, the feature is actually driving out your teams here. And so when the teams are reflected in this, that's what your architecture looks like. So this is the inverse Conway maneuver. But of course, continuous delivery. We cannot forget about continuous delivery. Again, another thing that we see when we go into all of these different companies is that they say, okay, let's do microservices. But then we say, okay, so what does continuous delivery look like for you guys? Are you able to deploy safely to production? And they kind of look at us like, wait, what? We're like, well, is your systems tested? If I push a button right now, does everything, like, do you have continuous delivery? And they're like, no, but we want microservices. And I'm like, oh, okay, back up again. Because you need to make sure that you're able to safely deploy your services, many services, or one service into production safely with confidence. Because if you don't, then there's no point. All of a sudden in microservices land, now you have many, many different services that you cannot deploy safely, and then you're in bigger trouble. So this is a big prerequisite before really thinking about the microservices architecture. This is something that we stole from Neil Ford. I love this slide. So essentially, it's around products and not projects. So one of the big things that we see as well is, we have a team that gets started, and we say, okay, cool. You are on this project, and you have your project code, and go do that stuff, and then you'll probably not be part of it in a couple of months, but just, go do all the things. And so then that happens there. And then after that project is done, maybe one poor soul is left behind for the maintenance work and just making sure that whatever bugs come along, that person will go fix. But what happens in this world, this project world, is I don't care. I'm a developer. I don't care about the project itself. Like, I'm just here to write code. I'm a code monkey. I'm just here to actually make sure that thing goes on and that I filled out my timesheet for this. The one thing we want to think about for our organization and around Conway's Law and that feature-focused team is thinking very product-focused. Everyone on the team, DevOps, developers, QAs, BAs, product, everybody on that team needs to really understand the product and actually how do you drive out the best type of product. That's actually where you're going to get your teams to get excited about what they're developing. And we're talking about, autonomous teams and those types of things, getting really, really excited about what you're making. With Amazon's quote, you build it, you run it. Think about this. If I'm building something and I have to sit there and run it and see it in production, I'm going to feel a lot more ownership of that product than I will ever be with a project up here when someone tells me what to do there. So that's something that we want to do to really turn around the organization and think about that. Oh yeah, I had animations. This is actually the main point of the entire deck. I mean, there's pros and cons to every type of architecture that we'll look at. Microservices is the thing right now, but right now we really need to think about, are you mature enough for microservices? We talk about monitoring, configuration, integration, all of those things. If we're not thinking about any of those things, if we're not looking at continuous delivery and understanding that, then I would say, yeah, you're not tall enough for microservices yet. Go back and look at all of the things that you need to set up for your organization to be prepared for it. Again, I'm not against microservices. I love microservices when you're ready for it, when you're actually ready to be able to do that. And one of the things that you can do is actually you can prepare your organization for doing that by pulling out one small service at a time. So we go from monolith to microservices. It doesn't mean that everything needs to go small into these micro and nano services. Maybe just pull out the one and actually start building your infrastructure around that. Start thinking about continuous delivery and how you're continuous delivering that one microservice. See how that works. Once you actually get all of that up and running, then pulling the rest out is actually going to be a lot easier, as long as you have the foundation and as long as you have the maturity as an organization. You don't want to do this, okay? So the life of a software engineer. Like every time I have a clean slate and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's going to be the best architected, best design thing I've ever done before. And then of course, maybe just 3 months later, I'm like, what did I build again? How did I do that? I don't know why I went there. And so again, it's about maturity. It's about really thinking about what are you actually trying to build? What does your business actually want? And so when you actually really think about that and have the baseline, the foundation for the microservices architecture, then hopefully it doesn't look like that. It may look a little bit like that, but at least you have the foresight to pull back and say, oh, okay, we need to fix something here. Yesterday's best practice is tomorrow's anti-pattern. So, you know, we inadvertently build architectures to solve outdated problems. Like this microservices thing, as we've all talked about, it's so on steroids, you know, like this has happened a lot. So, but we always need to just pull back and understand why we're doing something, why we're architecting the way we are. Thank you. Sorry, I think I probably went kind of fast on that one, but yeah.